Now, the reason she had to hide him, of course, we know because the Torah has already told us that the Egyptian program, the Egyptian uh, decree had already been promulgated that all male children should be thrust into the Nile. So therefore, she hid him as best she could. Of course, we know this is the uh, describes the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu, etc. But what I want to share with you tonight is a fascinating analysis of a quirky medrash, a fairly well-known medrash. Rashi does not quote it, but I don't, as far as I know, I don't think Rashi quotes it. But it's an interesting medrash you may have come across, and as I said, I would describe it as a bit quirky, if that is not irreverent to say. But Tele ben Vitero. She saw that he was good. This child, this boy, there was something special about him. So the Medrash says the following: Rebbe, the great Talmudic sage, Rabbi Judah the Prince, Haya Yoshev V'Doresh. He was sitting giving a lecture. V'Haya Hatzivu Misnam Name. The congregation, the community, his audience, they were dozing, they were sleeping, they were dropping off. They didn't have. It was not a Zoom shear where you can turn off your camera. You can do whatever you like. You can make dinner. You can, whatever the sort of whatever moves you, turn off your camera, and that's it. However, in those days, in the olden days, they didn't have that option. So just like I can see Ruthie and Elisheva talking now, so the rabbi giving the shiur could see what people were doing. Are they listening? Are they attentive? Are they nodding off? Okay. I mean, I'm being a bit deliberately facetious. It's unusual that the Medrash should tell us not only the rabbi's teaching, but it should tell us the context, that is to say, the actual setting, and the fact that his listeners were apparently not very captivated by it. Bikesh la'oraram, he wanted to arouse them, he wanted to wake them up. Amar lahem, and this is the drasha that he said that he hoped would arouse them from their somnolescence, from their slumber. Amar lahem, isha achas haisa b'Mitzrayim. There was one woman in Egypt in ancient times. Va'isa yoledes shishim revo b'keres echad. And she gave birth to 600,000 at one time. So if you heard of multiple births, maybe twins, maybe triplets, so she gave birth to 600,000. Of course, such a statement is, can only be understood metaphorically. It goes without saying. And the reference, of course, is to our pasuk, to Yocheved, who gave birth to a child. That child grew up to be Moshe Rabbeinu. And the midrashic interpretation here is that Moshe was somehow equal to Shakul Keneged, all of Israel. Excuse me. And we find that suggestion in a few places. Not that he was literally, equal to them, but we can understand it at a simple level, meaning that he enabled them to survive. He saved them from Egyptian persecution and Egyptian genocide, and he brought them to Har Sinai. He gave them the Torah, and he essentially is responsible, is credited with saving the Jewish people. So it's as if he is equal to 600,000, the entire nation at the time. And Rebbe put it in those words and that kind of metaphorical usage in order to stimulate or somehow arouse the fascination of his listeners. So Rabbi Yonatan says, of course, this medrash is strange, requires an explanation. Why were they falling asleep when he was giving his drasha? And why did he choose or believe that he could arouse them from their slumber with this particular drash? Okay, it is something, as I said, quirky. It's something kind of on the prima facie, it's preposterous. It causes you to think a bit more deeply and to sort of, exercise your brain cells a little bit to understand what he's getting at. But there must be more to it. So he explains it as follows. Rabbi Yonatan says, the pasuk, the Gemara in Bava Metzia quotes a pasuk, Haged la'ami pish'am uleves Yaakov chatasam. Say to my people their crime, their iniquity, and to the house of Jacob their sins. Now, pesha is a more severe misdemeanor. You could say it's a felony. Chet is a generic term for transgression. But Pesha is worse. Pesha suggests a kind of willful rebellion. So the Gemara says as follows: Elo Tamid Chachamim, the Haged La'ami Pish'am, tell my nation of their crime. This refers to Talmidei Chachamim, the sages, Sheshigagasam Naaselehem Kizadonos. Their inadvertent transgressions are counted against them as if they were deliberate. In other words, the learned, when they transgress, even if they do so inadvertently, they're held accountable. It's counted against them as if it were a severe transgression. That's why it says Pisham, their crime, and to the rest of the nation, their sins. So this is the Ameh Haaretz. This refers to the, let's say, the ignoramuses, the rank and file, the rest of the nation. Shezadonos naselehem kishigagos. Their deliberate transgressions are counted for them as if they were inadvertent. So it's as if the Talmidei Chachamim get a more severe consequence, and their inadvertent actions are counted as if they were deliberate acts of rebellion, and the ignorant, even when they still sin deliberately and willfully, it's counted as if it was just inadvertent, just accidental. So the Maharsha there asks the question. Maharsha is one of the great, I would say, early Achronim. He lived in the late 1500s, and the Maharsha says he has an extensive commentary on the Agadic passages of the Talmud, for those who perhaps are not familiar with his writings. So he asks a very good question. He says, if that's the case, if the learned are punished, if their inadvertent sins are counted against them as if they were deliberate, and the ignorant is the opposite, in that case, everybody will want to be an Am Haaretz. Everybody will prefer the ignorance is bliss situation of the Am Haaretz, because they get off lightly in that case. So he suggests the following analysis. Rabbi Yonatan says that the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, Echad shogeg ve'echad mezid b'chilul Hashem. Whether inadvertent or deliberate, they're both the same when it comes to Chilul Hashem. When it comes to profaning the name of God, then they're both the same. Now, the simple intent is that a person cannot claim like he was just not paying attention, it was accidental, it was inadvertent. When it comes to desecrating the name of God, a person has to be very aware, very alert, and he can't just fall back on saying, well, it was accidental, so it's not a big deal. That's probably the simple meaning of the Mishnah. But if you take it at face value, it sounds as if there's no distinction between the two. So Ramban says, he quotes Ramban. To be honest, he doesn't say where Ramban says this. Obviously, Ramban did not write a commentary on Pirkei Avos. He wrote extensively, and it may well appear somewhere else, but I don't know exactly where. I also wonder if maybe it should be Rambam. I didn't look up the Rambam. In any case, he says, Hiksha Ramban as follows. He says, Chas v'shalom, heaven forbid that there should be equal a person who sins deliberately and inadvertently when it comes to Chilul Hashem. He says the meaning is that a Talmid Chacham who commits a Chilul Hashem in the presence of the Amei Haaretz, in the presence of others, in the presence of the public, and he is a role model, he is expected to uphold an exacting standard. Even the appearance of wrongdoing he has to avoid. Like the Gemara in Yuma says that if a person who is a rabbi, who is a sage, who's a scholar, if he gives an example about himself, he says, like, if I were to buy some product in the shuk and I don't pay for it immediately, I buy on credit. He said this could be a Chilul Hashem, because people see the rabbi, he takes he asks for whatever product he's buying. I think it says meat or whatever it may be. I don't mean to offend any vegetarians, and he doesn't pay, and I don't give money right away. In other words, I buy in credit. I'll pay at the end of the month or something like that. That's a Chilul Hashem, because people won't realize that. They'll think that I just haven't bothered to pay, or I'm exploiting my prestigious position, and therefore I don't need to pay, and people will be ashamed, embarrassed to ask me for the money, which would be Chilul Hashem. That's an example. So we have the Gemara Yuma mentions a few examples of behavior which is actually not forbidden per se, and it's not even immoral, but it could have the appearance, it could be misunderstood. So that's a Chilul Hashem. That's what the Ramban says. That Echad Shogev, Echad Mezid, it means that a Talmid Chacham who does something which, because of the misapprehension of the onlooker, it seems like wrongdoing. So the Talmid Chacham, is counted. It is counted against him. So he says, with this we can answer the question of the Maharsha that it's not true generally. That is to say, the transgressions, the inadvertent sins of the Talmid Chacham are not always counted against him as if it was deliberate, but only if he does it in the presence of the Amaratzim. Only if he does it in the presence of others, because the point, as we've just said, is others will learn from it. Just make an adjustment here. That others will learn from it, and therefore he has to be careful. His behavior has to be of the highest standard if he's acting in public. But it doesn't mean that everything he does, even any inadvertent error in private, will be counted against him as a willful transgression. So far, so good. But we haven't yet gotten to the crux of it. Because he says, Rabbi Yonatan says, it's still problematic. Because at the end of the day, a person might say, it's still safer to be an Am Haaretz. Because the Talmid Chacham, if he sins inadvertently in private, perhaps it won't be counted against him so severely. But maybe there'll be an onlooker. If we're talking about an inadvertent, a thoughtless error which anybody can commit and happens to be in public view, then again, he's held to a very high standard and he'll be punished perhaps severely for it. So he says that the explanation lies in the following. The Gemara in Yuma says, Kol hamazake es harabim ein chet ba'al yado. Someone who brings merit to the community, no transgression will come through his hands. In other words, a person who does a mitzvah in the presence of an Am Haaretz, or to put it in contemporary terms, let's say a rabbi, who does something praiseworthy, who does something exemplary, who does something worthy of emulation in public, in the presence of the community, he is setting an example, and he is bringing a role model, and he is bringing merit to the community if he's teaching them, if he's leading them, if he's inspiring them. So therefore, that's called mezake es harabim, who brings zechut to the congregation, to the community, to the many. So he says this, of course, is why Rabbi said in this drasha that Moshe Rabbeinu is considered as if he's equal to all of Klal Yisrael, because he was the leader, he was the lawgiver, he was the exemplar, and he is the one who, through his righteousness and through his leadership and through his representing or carrying out the will of Hashem and redeemed the Jewish people, of course, he brought great merit to them. He said, with this now, we can understand why Rabbi was giving this drasha, Hagid la'ami mapisham elo tamidi chachamim, because he said that's what he was explaining. He was teaching this idea that the learned, the scholars, the Tamid Chacham are held to a higher standard. And people started to fall asleep because they thought, hey, if that's the case, like the question of the Parasha, who wants to be a Talmid Chacham? Better I don't hear. I'll take a little nap. I'll remain in blissful ignorance, and whatever transgressions I may commit, okay, they'll be counted as inadvertent. Even if I do them deliberately, they'll be counted as inadvertent. Better to be an Am Haaretz. So that's why they were falling asleep. Falling asleep means they were closing their ears to it. They didn't want to hear. Why? Because of this possibility that actually you're better off not being a Talmid Chacham. So that's why they were falling asleep. Rabbi wanted to arouse them, and he said, on the contrary, if you are learned and you are worthy and you are an example, an exemplar, if you serve as an example to others, then you will bring merit to the people, merit to the congregation. You will be equal in your achievements because of the way you have transformed and influenced others. You'll be equal to the whole congregation, even to the whole community, even to the whole generation. Moshe Rabbeinu, therefore, it's as if Yocheved, his mother, gave birth to the entire Jewish world, because this is the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, he was essentially saying to them, it is true that an Am Haaretz, because he is ignorant, because he is unlettered, because not that much is expected of him, even a willful, conscious transgression, he'll get off easily because of his ignorance. But isn't it much better to be a Talmid Chacham, to be in a position to influence and to inspire, to be the role model, to be the example for others? So this is how this was Rebbe's response to this misunderstanding of the principle of Haged La'ami Pish'am Uvleves Yaakov Chatasam. Just like to add, so this is what I call noblesse oblige. So yes, it does come with responsibility, but with that responsibility comes greatness, the potential for greatness, the potential to transform the generation and the entire Jewish people. And therefore he was saying better to be a Talmid Chacham. I just was thinking about some examples of this phenomenon close to our own time, and two people that came to mind are both called Yisrael. Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. You know that Baal Shem Tov breathed new life into the Jewish people. It's not the time for a historical sketch, but the nature and the context of the life of Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, the famous founder of the Hasidic movement, who was born in 1700, that is an example of someone who, through his, not just his righteousness, but through his influence, transformed the Jewish world. Another Yisrael, Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, who lived about 100 years later, but more than 100 years after the Baal Shem Tov, in a different time, in a different place, but also in his own way, he breathed new life into the Jewish people. And because he was a public figure, because of that, he was able to transform the Jewish world. And there are other personalities as well. But certainly Moshe Rabbeinu, I think we can agree, would be the very paradigm, the exemplar of this principle. Okay, so this is Fatahai Shevet Teled Bain, and the Medrash, it says a woman in Egypt once gave birth to 600,000 people all at one time. Okay, let's continue to a further thought, which I found very interesting. And actually, the funny thing is, I saw this idea, the same essential idea, quoted in the name of a different authority. And then when I was learning Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz this week to prepare, well, I learned it for my own sake, but also with this shiur in mind, came across essentially the same idea. So I thought I would share it with you tonight as well. So this is Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud Dalet. It's just a few verses further on. And the Torah says here, the Torah describes Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud Aleph, verse 11. Moshe grew up. Why is he growing up? In the past, in the fullness of time, he grew up from infancy, and of course, he grew up in the palace, as is very well known. So Moshe was rescued from a watery grave, from being a breakfast for a crocodile, and the daughter of Paro raised him as her own child, and he became like a foster son to in the palace. And the Torah says, in those days, Vayigdal Moshe, he grew up, and he went out to see his brethren. And he saw their suffering. And he saw an Egyptian man, an Egyptian taskmaster, I think we would say, beating a Hebrew slave, a Hebrew of his brethren, of Moshe's brethren. He looked around here and there. She saw there was no one watching, apparently. And he struck the Egyptian and he hid him in the sand. He buried him in the sand. So Moshe has intervened to save a Hebrew slave from being beaten. Presumably, Moshe felt he was beating this Hebrew slave to death. That is to say, the taskmaster was essentially seeking to kill this Hebrew slave, and in order to save his victim, Moshe knocked him off. So it would seem. Okay, the next part of Yud Hasheni. The next day he went out and he saw two Hebrews fighting. So he said to the wicked one, to the aggressor, Lama Sakereyecha. Now here's an interesting response in Pasuk Yud Dalet. Vayomer misam chaleish sarva shapet aleinu. Who put you in charge of us? Halahargeni ata omer. Do you propose to kill me? Kasha harates hamitzri, as you killed the Egyptian. And Moshe was afraid, and he said, Achein nodah hadavar. The matter is known. Now, what's interesting is this unusual turn of phrase, Halahargeni ata omer. Are you saying that you're going to kill me by rebuking me, by saying, Lama sekereyecha, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? Moshe realized that his action the previous day had been noticed, and therefore he fled. Okay, the word reached the ears of Pharaoh, Moshe had to flee, etc. What interests me is this interesting turn of phrase, Halageni hata omer, and now turning back one pasuk to Yud Beis, Vayifen kovacho, Moshe looked around here and there, Vayarki ein ish. Okay, that's the context. Now let me tell you what the Rambam says, and we'll soon see the connection to this pasuk, these psukim that we have now just reviewed. So Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz quotes the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, and the laws of the Malachim, the laws of kings, and it's not only about kings and queens or royalty. It has that, but it also has other laws about the Jewish relationship with the rest of the world, both in terms of the Messianic era at the very end of that section, which is the concluding section of the whole Mishnah Torah. Also the laws relating to mitzvahs b'nei Noach, the Noachide laws, and our relationship with b'nei Noach generally. We find some references to those subjects in Hilchos Malachim. And there the Rambam takes up the halacha of a non-Jew who strikes a Jewish person. What is the punishment that the Torah stipulates? So we find that the law that, at least according to the Torah law, that regulates or that the legislation of the Torah for Bnei Noach is sometimes more severe. Their restrictions, their laws, their mitzvahs are fewer than the mitzvahs that regulate Jewish life. When I say there, I mean according to Torah law, what people do in practice is no doubt a different matter altogether. But the mitzvahs b'nei Noach, of course, are more limited than the broad 613 mitzvahs that are incumbent upon the Jewish people collectively. However, the punishments are often more severe. So the Rambam says that, see the language here. Nachri shehikes Israel chayav misa b'dei shamayim. A Gentile who strikes a Jewish person is liable to death at the hands of heaven. And this is based on Gemara and Sanhedrin, and the Kesef Mishnah, one of the classic commentaries on the Rambam, actually written by Rabbi Yosef Karo, who I'm sure you know also wrote the Shulchan Aruch. So towards the very end of his life, or actually he may have written it earlier, but it was published. Actually, it was published later, towards the end of his life, although he actually wrote it earlier. He wrote a commentary on the Rambam called Kesef Mishnah. He asks that from the Gemara it is apparent that on the contrary, the punishment is death at the hands of the earthly court. That the Sanhedrin or an earthly court, in principle, subject to warning and witnesses, etc., would actually be empowered to carry out the death penalty as a result of this transgression. In fact, it's subject to a machlokes. It's subject to a machlokes because there's another opinion, according to Rabbi Yehuda Malki Moso, that he is subject to lashes, not to the death penalty, but only to lashes, which is, presumably, I think we would agree, is a more lighter punishment. Says the Kesef Mishnah, it's evident from the Rambam, from the Gemara, since the two opinions, one says the death penalty and the other one says lashes, it's more intuitively compatible if we say the lashes are surely at the hands of the earthly court. God doesn't administer lashes. It says Malkos lashes, that's surely the earthly court. So the other opinion, which says subject to the death penalty, should also be in the earthly court. That is the question of the Kesef Mishnah. So where does the Rambam get the idea? How does the Rambam arrive at the conclusion that the punishment is death penalty, but only at the hands of heaven? The earthly courts are not empowered to carry that out. So he suggests the following. He says that our passage tells us that Moshe saw this Egyptian striking the Hebrew. Now, I said that according to the Derech HaPshat, he was trying to kill him. That's why Moshe took that vigilante action. But maybe it could be the case that he wasn't necessarily trying to kill him. That is to say, the taskmaster was not intending to beat the Hebrew slave to death, but he was beating him. He was harming him. He was maybe wounding him, injuring him. So Moshe took action. Now, in this turn of phrase, halahageni ata omer, so Rashi says, halahageni ata omer, for those who have Rashi's commentary, take a look. Are you going to kill me the way you killed the Egyptian? Says Rashi, mikan anu lemedim shaharago b'shem hamuforash. Halahageni ata omer, it doesn't just mean, do you propose? Are you saying you're going to kill me? But it means, are you going to kill me? Are you going to kill me by speaking? Halagena ta omer. Is it through speech that you're going to kill me the same way you killed the Egyptian? So if you turn back one or two verses where the pasuk says that Vayach es hamitzri, he struck him, according to this comment of Rashi, he struck him using the Shem HaMefarash, which means the ineffable name of God. It's the name of God which is esoteric, which is known only to certain great people, maybe the prophets, maybe certain Kabbalists, an esoteric name of God. And there are those who know the name and who are able to do, let's say, metaphysical things with the name. They are able to accomplish metanatural consequences by uttering the name of God. This is the Shem HaMeforash. So the Rambam apparently is of the view that from here we see that the way that Moshe killed him was with the Shem HaMeforash, which means it was ultimately at the hands of heaven. He didn't take a spear or a sword and kill him in that way. He did it with his mouth. He did it by, so to speak, harnessing the spiritual powers to save the life of this Hebrew slave. But in a sense, it was bidei shamayim, therefore it was through the hands of heaven. Moshe did not lay a hand upon him. It was through the agency of the heavenly court, so to speak. Why? So why did Moshe kill him? So take a closer look at this pasuk Yudais. Vayifen kol v'chol, he looked around. Vayaki anish, he saw no one was watching. But Rashi has a different understanding. A famous comment of Rashi. Vayifen kol v'chol ra'ama salo. The second part of Rashi. Pshuto kimashma. Oh, okay. We really need the next part. Vayaki ish. Moshe looked around and he saw she'ein ish asid latzeis mimeno she'iskayer. Moshe foresaw. He looked around and he saw there is no man, there is no worthy person, there is no descendant of this Egyptian thug who is going to become righteous, who's going to join the Jewish people. He has no future descendant who could justify or who could defend him at this time. And when Moshe had that certainty, so therefore Moshe acted against him. According to Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, he says that this is what the Rambam is talking about. The Rambam says that from the example of Moshe Rabbeinu, we see that it's only the hands of heaven. Why? Because even if a person is wicked, and even if he is a thug, and even if he is an Egyptian taskmaster, but maybe he will have a child or a descendant. Maybe there will be some future generation who will vindicate or who will redeem the ancestor, who will, so to speak, make it worthwhile for this person to live in the merit of that descendant. Such a judgment, of course, can only be made by Moshe Rabbeinu himself, or maybe another great prophet, maybe not even another prophet, only Moshe, or shall we say, Hashem himself. So this is why it's bidei shamayim, because an earthly court has no license to say that this criminal, we think his great grandson or great granddaughter is going to be worthy, is going to be righteous, is going to be someone for whom it's worthwhile to save him. Maybe he's a young person, and if he is allowed to live, he will become the father, or she, for that matter, will become the mother of someone worthwhile, etc. An earthly court cannot make such a judgment, and is certainly not empowered to do so either. If a person has been convicted of a crime, then justice has to take its course. The heavenly court is not restrained in those ways. And therefore, this was the action of Moshe. Moshe was acting, so to speak, as an agent of the heavenly court. And Moshe saw ki ein ish, there's no one to redeem this thug, this Egyptian thug, and therefore Moshe realized that the right thing to do was to give him the punishment that he deserved. And from here, the Rambam derives the principle that someone who commits a nachri, that is beating a Jewish person, he is chayav misa, he's liable to the death penalty, but only at the hands of heaven. It's not for an earthly court to decide. I've got a great story, but for that you've got to come to Kesher on Shabbos to illustrate this idea as well of how one never knows what the future may hold, and even what a person's own progeny or descendants, or shall I say followers, disciples, or whatever it may be, the influence, the positive effect that a person can have, even a person whose own behavior perhaps is not all that promising, but we never know what the future may hold. For that, you have to come on Shabbos to Kesher, and we look forward to seeing you there. Anyway, thanks to everyone. If there are any questions or comments, we're happy to take them. Yeah,